the case of Sony Milbrook. Sony Milbrook was born in Memphis, Tennessee, USA, on February 15, 1981. She grew up in a close-knit family with 2 sisters, 3 brothers, and a large extended family, which allowed her to form a strong bond with her cousin Jenny during her teenage years. In 1998, at the age of 17, Sony became a popular student at her high school. The same year, she met Lelf Moody, a man in his 20s, and began a romantic relationship with him. Unfortunately, the relationship turned out to be abusive, and Lelf's violent behavior left visible marks on Sony's body. Despite this, they had 4 children together, 3 girls and a boy named after Elf. A year later, in 1999, Sony's mother noticed a bruise on her chest. Sony confessed that the bruise was caused by her friend Leith, who was controlling and often tried to isolate her from her friends and family. In the same year, Sony moved into an apartment in the Fraser neighborhood of Memphis. However, her new home was soon vandalized, with furniture slashed, clothes missing, the television destroyed, food smeared on the walls, and personal hygiene products scattered everywhere, including down the stairs. On the mirror, someone had written, "Kiki loves you" in red nail polish, with Kiki being Leith's nickname. On October 31, 2000, Sony, her cousin Pamela, and Leith went to a bar called Mirage. While they were there, Leith slapped Sony and threw a drink in her face. Sony and Pamela left the bar and sat in the car, where Sony was visibly shaken and trembling. She asked Pamela to take her home before Leith arrived. Once home, Sony locked and chained the door. An hour later, Leith showed up, yelling and banging on the door. Pamela finally got Leith to leave by threatening to call the police. After Sony calmed down, her cousin left her alone at home. However, later that evening, Pamela got a call saying that Sony was in the hospital. Somehow, Leith had managed to get into the house, and when Sony tried to end the relationship, he violently retaliated. He tore her clothes, beat her on the head, face, chest, arms, and thighs, leaving her with bruises all over her body, a loose tooth, and even temporarily losing consciousness after being choked until she passed out by Lelf Moody. Not long after, Sony discovered Elf Moody's birth control pills in her apartment, and he assaulted her again. By late 2008, when Sony was 27, she was working at a Christian academy. She was a reliable employee who always arrived on time. So when she missed work or requested time off, it was usually for significant reasons. One day, she called her employer to say she couldn't come in because her face was badly bruised, and she didn't want the children to see her like that. The director allowed her to wear sunglasses inside the academy, and Sony confided in her boss about how her boyfriend had once chased her in his car, trying to force her off the road. Lelf Moody's violence wasn't limited to Sony and their children. In April 2008, he was found parked in an SUV with a firearm despite being prohibited from possessing one as a convicted felon. He had already served 2 years in prison for theft and another 3 for drug possession with intent to sell. On October 6, 2008, the situation between Sony and her boyfriend Leith reached a crisis point. After failing to show up at the academy, Sony sent a distressing text message to her boss at 5 p.m., stating that Leith was holding her hostage in her own home and had been beating her all day. She provided her address, prompting her boss to alert the police. 2 officers responded to the call and arrived at the residence. When they knocked on the door, it was locked from the inside, and there was no response. The fire department was called to break down the door, and upon entering the apartment, the officers saw Leith jumping out of an open window at the back of the apartment. Sony stood in the hallway, visibly distraught and unable to speak. Her 4 children were with her, creating a heart-wrenching scene. Her face and neck were covered in bruises and scratches. Once she calmed down, Sony recounted the events that had unfolded. She and Leith had started arguing, and he had refused to let her leave the house. Sony explained that they had not answered the door earlier because Leith had forbidden her or the children from approaching it or the windows. He had even hurt one of their children by grabbing him and had prevented her from taking him to the hospital. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe to our new channel, where we uncover captivating and chilling cold cases that will keep you on the edge of your seat. You won't want to miss the twists and turns we have in store. Let's continue. Sony detailed the physical and verbal abuse she had suffered at Leith's hands, including being choked with a baby blanket until she lost consciousness. When the police arrived, Leith had threatened to suffocate her again, vowing to kill her next time. Although the officers searched the area, they were unable to find Leith. Sony and her children eventually left the house in her car. 3 days after the incident, Sony applied for a restraining order against Leith, fearing for her life and wanting to prevent any further contact with him. However, she failed to attend the court hearing on October 23rd, which meant the protection order was never granted. 6 months later, on March 10, 2009, Sony and Leith were still in contact. On that day, Leith was supposed to pick up the children for a doctor's appointment, but instead, he started a fight with Sony, accusing her of having a new boyfriend. The argument quickly escalated, with Leith slapping her, pulling her hair, and yelling death threats as she tried to escape. Sony managed to break free and ran out of the apartment, with Leith chasing after her. He didn't catch her, but instead grabbed their youngest child, an infant, and drove off at high speed. A police patrol responding to the domestic disturbance arrived just as Leith was fleeing. The officers attempted to stop him, but he evaded them and escaped. By early 2010, Sony, then 28 years old, was studying at Southeast Tennessee Community College. Her 5th child was 9 weeks old and in fragile health, requiring her to stay home and care for him. In January, Sony and their children moved into the Budget Lodge Motel in Memphis. On the very day they moved in, their arguments were so loud that the motel staff intervened as they were disturbing other guests. Unfortunately, peace remained elusive as their fights continued to disturb the neighbors and the management with excessive noise. On January 22nd, a hotel security guard witnessed Leith in a highly agitated state when he arrived at high speed in Sony's car. He began shouting at her while she stood on the second-floor balcony with their children. During the heated argument, Leith threw a bag of groceries at her. The security guard intervened, telling Leith that he needed to keep the noise down and refrain from throwing objects, and that the argument should be continued inside their room. However, Leith responded by telling the guard to mind his own business, locked the car, and walked away with the guard following him to a third-floor room that was not registered under anyone's name. When the guard asked Leith to hand over any hotel keys he had, Leith surprisingly produced keys to 3 different rooms despite not being registered as a guest. The following day, Leith, Sony, and their children moved to room 222. That evening, the night manager asked Leith to leave, which he did, but he soon returned. The confrontations persisted for a few more days until the same security guard who had repeatedly warned them finally asked Leith to vacate the property permanently. As Leith went to the parking lot, the receptionist attempted to calm him down, and the guard warned him not to return that night. Leith got into the car and drove away. On January 26th, Sony privately shared with Pamela that a lot was going on in her life and that she was currently staying at a motel. She hinted that she had something important to confide in Pamela and promised to get in touch if she ended up leaving the motel or if her boyfriend did. The next day began like any other, with Sony taking her younger kids to daycare and dropping off her oldest at school around 11 a.m. However, things took a turn when the housekeeping manager knocked on Sony's door, speaking to her through the window to inform her that they needed to settle their bill or leave the hotel room. He returned several times that day looking for a response. At around 2:30 p.m., Leith answered the door, telling the manager that his mother would be back soon with the money they owed. But when the hotel security guard checked room 222, he found it empty, with children's clothes, bags, and various items scattered all over the floor. One of the beds was neatly made, which seemed out of place given the state of the room. Later that day, Sony failed to pick up her eldest daughter from school, which was unusual. The school secretary called Christine, the child's maternal grandmother, to come and get the child's maternal grandmother to come and get her. Christine tried calling Sony, but there was no answer. Growing worried, she discovered that her other grandchildren were still at daycare. Convinced something was wrong, Christine asked her husband to pick up the younger kids while she went to the school. They eventually contacted the police, who arrived at the house around 10:30 p.m. and filed a missing persons report. On January 28th, the housekeeping manager re-entered room 222, which was now vacant, to collect and label the personal belongings that the previous tenants had left behind, apparently to avoid paying their bill. The room contained piles of clothing and a large trash bag, which were both taken to the storage area. After emptying the room, it was thoroughly cleaned and readied for new guests. The following day, on January 29th, James and Rhonda Sargent moved into room 222. Upon moving in, the new tenants immediately noticed a strong, unpleasant odor in the room. They attempted to mask it by burning incense, but this effort was unsuccessful. During their search for the source of the smell, they discovered that the previous tenants had also tried to hide it, as evidenced by the scented tissues they found stuck in the tiles and ceiling vents. The smell was most pronounced when someone sat on the bed. On January 29th, the Memphis Police Department's missing persons unit visited the hotel to ask about Sony's whereabouts, as it was the last place she was seen. However, the officers did not search room 222. Leith was found on February 2nd at around 7 p.m. in Sony's car, which was parked at a shopping center. He was arrested for stealing the vehicle and held in police custody for 48 hours. During that time, he was questioned about Sony's disappearance. Leith said the last time he saw her was on January 26th, when they met at 7 a.m. in the hotel parking lot, went to the room, were intimate, and then went back outside. According to Leith, Sony let him take her car keys because she planned to use her social benefits and a school loan to buy a new car. However, investigators discovered that Leith had actually been staying at a different hotel, making it unlikely that he spent nights in the car, especially considering the snow during that period. On February 3rd, police found a debit card with Sony's name along with several recent purchase receipts inside the car. On the same day, police examined the clothes that had been stored at the hotel, searching for DNA or other evidence, but they found nothing. This lack of progress added to their frustrations. And as a result, Leith had to be released due to insufficient evidence linking him to Sony's disappearance. Meanwhile, Sony's cousin and her mother had the painful task of going to the hotel to collect Sony's belongings. Sony's cousin had a terrible premonition, but unfortunately, she did not find anything to support her feelings. On February 4th, the police went to Moody's uncle's house, where they found a DVD player that had been taken from the hotel room in Sony's wallet. Moody had given these items to his cousin, who told the police that Leith had borrowed the DVD player on January 24th, saying he wanted to watch a movie. Leith was seen driving a red car that day. Later, when the cousin asked Leith why he hadn't picked up the children on January 27th, Leith avoided the question. When asked about Sony, Leith left the DVD player and wallet in a bag and quickly left the house. James and Rhonda Sargent asked to be moved from room 222 because of the constant bad smell. Since no other rooms were available, they had to move to a different hotel. However, even after the room was cleaned and the carpet was washed in early February, subsequent guests in room 222 still complained about the foul smell, which only slightly improved for a few days. Sony's family, especially her kids, were devastated by her disappearance. Their only hope was for her safe return. On February 4th, homicide detectives visited the hotel where Sony was last seen. By then, her room had been occupied and cleaned at least 3 times. The detectives didn't enter the room, but asked the staff if they had noticed anything unusual, and all said no. On February 7th, James and Rhonda, probably relatives or friends of Sony, returned to the hotel and changed rooms 3 times, including one night in room 222, which was the same room Sony had stayed in. They told the management that the room still smelled bad. In March, a deeper cleaning of room 222 was carried out, including the carpets, bedding, bathroom curtains, and window drapes. But to everyone's surprise, the smell didn't go away. It got stronger. The manager talked to the security guard about the issue, and during their conversation, they remembered that Sony had vanished at the January. The guard recalled the events from that time and suggested that the manager check room 222 for signs of blood or cleaning products. 10 minutes later, the manager returned and asked the guard to come with him. What they found was horrifying. The 2 men walked into the room to find that the manager had removed the mattress from one bed, leaving only the frame behind. The lower part of the bed frame had a built-in enclosure, which prevented the space underneath from being used as a storage area. However, when they lifted the box spring, they discovered a large empty space that could conceal anything. As they peered through the solid edges of the frame, they stumbled upon a gruesome sight, a decomposing body. They immediately called the police, who arrived at the scene shortly after. Upon inspection, the bed frame was found to have marks all over it, with 2 broken wooden areas near the headboard. A towel and a cloth bag were discovered between the legs of the body, which was dressed in a shirt, but was naked from the waist down. The autopsy conducted by the forensic team revealed that the cause of death was strangulation using a coaxial cable. The cable was wrapped around the victim's neck, under one arm, around the chest, and ended at the back. According to the forensic examiner, it would have taken at least 2 to 3 minutes of continuous pressure to cause death. DNA analysis matched Sony's genetic profile, which included female markers. Additionally, male genetic material was found on 5 parts of the cable. The main theory was that Sony was already dead when she was reported missing, and that Leith had used the coaxial cable from the DVD player he had borrowed from his cousin, suggesting premeditation. Leith was detained by the police shortly after, although not for the discovery of Sony's body. He was arrested on a separate charge of possessing a firearm despite a prior felony conviction. Despite this, he was considered a person of interest at the time of his arrest, as he was the last person seen with Sony alive. Furthermore, he was found in Sony's car when he was arrested and taken to the detention facility in Mason on March 18th. The police have launched an internal investigation to find out why the case took such an unusual turn. They acknowledged that the family deserved answers and explained that despite their eagerness to solve the case, the officers had taken a wrong turn that led them away from the room. The police also stated that they had never dealt with a situation like this before, saying that the discovery was more astonishing than fiction and highlighted the tragedy of domestic violence. However, they regretted that the room had been cleaned and rented out multiple times since Sony's death, which made it difficult for them to collect evidence. Rhonda, one of the first tenants to occupy the room where Sony's body was found, expressed about the police explanation when she spoke to the media. She pointed out that if the officers had asked to enter the room during their January visit, she and her husband would have let them in. Rhonda argued that unlike her and her husband, the officers should have been able to recognize the smell of a decomposing body and found Sony much sooner. Finally, the time arrived to bid a loving and dignified farewell to Sony. On March 24th, her funeral took place. Following her death, Sony's children were placed in the care of her sister and brother-in-law. By April 1st, they had begun the process of obtaining legal guardianship of the children. She acknowledged that while the children were the primary victims of the tragedy, the lives of all family members were severely disrupted. She vowed that although she couldn't bring her sister back, she was resolute in providing for Sony's children, ensuring they received the necessities like food, clothing, and toys, and keeping them together as a family unit. Sony had benefited from a social program that refilled her debit card for grocery purchases on a regular basis. Shortly before her disappearance, the card was replenished as part of her tax refund. The police were able to track the card's movements, which led them to Leith, who was found with the card. Their investigation showed that the card was used on February 1st, for days after Sony went missing, at a convenience store she regularly visited on the 1st of each month to withdraw cash using her electronic benefit transfer card. The police visited the store and asked the owner to share the footage from the 16 security cameras. The surveillance system had captured footage of a man wearing yellow clothing using Sony's card at 11:38 a.m. on February 1st. He bought a bottle of orange juice, withdrew some cash, and purchased a cigar. After making the purchases, the man returned to a car driven by another person. In February 2014, nearly 4.5 years after the crime, Leith's trial finally began. By this time, the budget lodge hotel where the couple had stayed had closed down. Leith maintained his innocence, while the prosecutor described the events as a tragic and ugly culmination of a tumultuous relationship. In contrast, the defense attorney highlighted the lack of concrete evidence, including witnesses and physical proof, and disputed the prosecution's speculations. The defense attorney brought to attention a crucial piece of evidence, a fingerprint found on the bed frame that did not belong to Leith, suggesting the possibility of an alternate perpetrator. He also mentioned that Sony had been involved with other men in the past, which could have led to her murder. The attorney emphasized that Leith had no prior arrests for domestic violence against Sony. Furthermore, he revealed that Sony had moved back in with Leith due to a rat infestation at a relative's house where she was previously staying. On February 6th, a video was shown in court, which captured Leith using a prepaid Sony card just 4 days after the murder. While the defense team suggested that Leith's calm behavior during the transaction suggested he was innocent, they saw it as a sign of a cold-blooded and ruthless individual who was unbothered by the crime he had allegedly committed. On February 7, 2014, Leith was found guilty of first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison. 3 days later, on February 10th, Leith appealed the sentence, arguing that the court had made an error by considering his past history of domestic violence and that the evidence presented was insufficient. However, on July 7, 2015, the Tennessee Court of Criminal Appeals upheld the conviction, confirming the sentence. The case of Natalie Holloway. 18-year-old Natalie Holloway, who disappeared while on a trip to Aruba, an island in the southern Caribbean Sea near Venezuela. In May 2005, a group of 24 students from Mountain Brook High School, accompanied by 7 chaperones, traveled to Aruba to celebrate the start of their adult lives. The students stayed at the Holiday Inn and had access to beaches, palm trees, restaurants, and local entertainment venues. They spent 5 unforgettable days on the island, enjoying themselves with swimming, sunbathing, dancing, and partying. However, on the day of their return, Natalie Holloway was nowhere to be found. Her belongings, phone, and passport were still in the hotel, but she had vanished. Her mother, Elizabeth Twitty, was the first to raise the alarm and reported her concerns to one of the chaperones. Elizabeth recalled that at that moment, her heart sensed something was wrong, as her daughter was obedient and always stayed in touch. Natalie's mother and stepfather immediately flew to Aruba to search for her. Upon arriving, Elizabeth was able to find out more information than the police did, as the authorities seemed uninterested in starting a search. The police told Elizabeth that cases like this are not rare and that people often miss their planes or get lost in bars or with new acquaintances. However, Elizabeth knew her daughter and was convinced that something was seriously wrong. Natalie Holloway was last seen leaving Carlos and Charlie's nightclub with 17-year-old Jan, a local regular who had offered her a drink. They left with 2 other young men in a silver Honda car. For hours later, Natalie's mother, Elizabeth, contacted the police again with concerning information, leading to the detention of the trio. Initially, Vanderslot denied knowing Natalie, but later admitted to leaving the bar with her. They drove around, visited the beach, and then dropped her off near the hotel. His friends, Deepak, and confirmed his account. Natalie was born on October 21, 1986 in Clinton, Mississippi to Elizabeth and David Edward Holloway. Her parents loved each other dearly, but divorced after 13 years. Natalie and her brother stayed with their mother, but their father remained supportive emotionally and financially. In February, Elizabeth remarried to George Twitty, and Natalie moved to Mountain Brook. The move was smooth, and she made new friends easily due to her sociable nature. Her family was devout, attending church every Sunday, which influenced Natalie's upbringing. Relatives remembered her as kind, modest, and beautiful with a radiant smile. Natalie was an excellent student, engaged in dance, and participated in various clubs. She dreamed of pursuing a career in medicine and had chosen a local university for a substantial scholarship. At the time, she had promising life prospects and was excited about an upcoming trip. Elizabeth believed her daughter was unlikely to trust a stranger or get into a car with him. Surveillance footage from the bar confirmed her suspicions, showing Natalie's behavior changed after drinking a beverage offered by Jan, suggesting she was under the influence of some substance. The staff at Carlos and Charlie spoke well of Natalie, but Vanderslot had a questionable reputation, often behaving poorly, indulging in gambling, and consuming forbidden substances. He had previously recorded and uploaded videos of his exploits to the internet, but was never held accountable due to his father's influence as a well-known lawyer aiming for a judgeship. The disappearance of Natalie sparked a nationwide search, with the island authorities launching an extensive operation to find her. Volunteers, divers, and specially trained dogs were deployed to cover a vast area. The government even declared a public holiday, and 50 Marines combed the coastline. An airplane equipped with thermal imaging scanned over 40 kilometers of terrain, but Natalie seemed to have vanished into thin air. On June 30th, investigators discovered that there was no footage of Natalie entering a building, which contradicted the statements of Jan and the Kalpoe brothers. The police brought them in for questioning again, and this time, the younger Vander Sloot unexpectedly changed his story. He claimed to have dropped Natalie off at a location without surveillance, not near the hotel, and added that he saw a figure in black moving towards her. Hotel security staff who were on duty that night were detained, with investigators suspecting they might have intercepted Natalie on her way. On June 9th, detectives arrested the suspicious trio, and one of the security guards shared a cell with the Kalpoe brothers. The guard learned a crucial detail. Suddish confessed that he and Deepak had lied to cover for their friend, leaving Jan alone with Natalie on the beach. The security guards were released on June 13th. And on June 17th, another suspect, Steve Gregory Cruz, a DJ, was detained. The police suspected his involvement in Natalie's disappearance. On June 22nd, Paulus Vander Sloot was brought in for questioning and detained, but he was released on June 26th due to insufficient evidence. Jan offered a third explanation of the events, trying to shift the blame onto the Kalpoe brothers, claiming he parted ways with Natalie near his home, and she left with them. However, his story was not taken seriously. A lawyer defended Suddish and Deepak, and on July 4th, after a brief trial, the Kalpoe brothers were released. Jan Vander Sloot, born on August 6, 1987 in Arnhem, Netherlands, was one of 3 brothers in a large family. He was a good student, excelled in sports, and planned to attend St. Leo University in Florida. Jan's childhood was marked by a strained relationship with his mother, Anita, an art teacher, who considered him an incubator liar. He grew up rebellious, often ran away from home, and fell in with a bad crowd, developing a penchant for gambling. Despite this, he presented himself as cool and fearless to his friends. Locals were suspicious of Jan's lenient attitude, fearing it would lead to trouble. However, he was popular among girls and often took advantage of them. As the investigation into the suspects continued, the search for Natalie persisted. U.S. authorities closely monitored the progress and provided substantial financial support. Despite the scrutiny, the Holloway family was desperate to find their daughter alive and announced a monetary reward, which initially started at $50,000. As hope dwindled, the reward increased to $1 million. Additionally, $100,000 was offered for information leading to the location of her remains, which later increased to $250,000. During this time, the investigation hit several dead ends. However, after the reward announcement, new witnesses emerged. One claimed to have seen Jan with the Kalpoe brothers at a local night spot between 2:30 and 3 a.m. Another witness claimed to have seen several suspicious men hiding a woman's body at a dump on the afternoon of May 30th. However, these statements led the investigation astray, and after numerous checks, their claims were not corroborated. On August 26th, the police detained the Kalpoe brothers and another young man, but these actions were unrelated to the case. The arrest was more about intimidation and an attempt to get them to talk. Ultimately, on September 3, 2005, all 4 were released on bail. A week and a half later, the court removed all restrictions and prohibitions, as none provided any substantial leads to the investigation. Jan Vander Sloot was detained for 3 months, but after his release, he sought to capitalize on his notoriety by giving interviews and appearing on TV shows. In these appearances, he claimed that Natalie Holloway had flirted with him and offered to have sex, but he declined because he didn't have a condom. However, during one show, he became aggressive and threw a glass at the interviewer. A journalist who was targeted by Jan's glass-throwing incident held a grudge against him and worked with authorities to place a bug in a friend's car. The bug captured Jan confessing to witnessing Natalie's death. He claimed that they had sex on the beach, but afterward, she began shaking, lost consciousness, and eventually died. Jan and a friend then disposed of her body at sea. Despite this confession, Jan managed to avoid consequences by denying the statement on another TV show, claiming he had only told his friend what he wanted to hear. In February 2007, Jan released a book, The Case of Natalie Holloway, my own account of her disappearance in Aruba, in which he presented his side of the story and apologized to Natalie's family. By this time, the official investigation had largely stalled. In February 2008, 2 new witnesses came forward. The first reported seeing Jan and his father on the beach around 4 a.m. on the night Natalie went missing. The younger Van der Sloot appeared disheveled, and the witness saw him arguing with his father in a car before they drove away. However, Parlis Van der Sloot had an alibi for the night in question. The second witness was Jan's former girlfriend, who recalled that Jan had once made a suspicious comment about being able to dispose of someone's body. However, this was not considered a strong lead, given Jan's history of lying and exaggeration. Jan and the Kalpoe brothers were detained multiple times, but released due to lack of evidence. The Holloway family hired a private investigator who, along with Natalie's father, conducted their own investigation, interviewing locals and searching the landfill. During this time, they uncovered several oversights by the local police, including failure to interview Natalie's classmates or hotel room neighbors. It was also discovered that someone had used Natalie's hotel key several times on the night of her disappearance, and that her mobile phone and toothbrush had been left behind. A male DNA was found on her toothbrush. The investigation ultimately revealed that the Aruban authorities had been negligent in their handling of the case. Jan's father, Paulus, died of a heart attack in 2010, reportedly due to the stress and shame of his son's actions. After his father's death, Jan attempted to blackmail the Holloway family, offering to reveal the truth for $250,000. The family agreed to meet with him and paid an advance of $25,000 during the meeting. Jan provided yet another version of events, claiming that Natalie had resisted his advances, which enraged him, and that he had pushed her, causing her to hit her head and lose consciousness. He then buried her body in a building foundation. However, the police investigation revealed that Jan's claims were false, as the house he pointed to had long been built, and its foundation was fully set at the time of Natalie's disappearance. Jan fled to Peru with the money, but unfortunately, the consequences did not catch up with him immediately. On June 1, 2010, the body of 21-year-old Stephanie Flores Ramirez was discovered in a hotel room in Lima, Peru. She had been severely beaten, and the cause of her death was determined to be a neck fracture. Surveillance cameras quickly helped identify the criminal, and soon after, Jan was arrested and taken to the police station. He explained that he had met Stephanie at a casino, and after playing poker, they decided to continue their acquaintance in his hotel room. However, when Stephanie accessed his laptop and discovered his connection to Natalie Holloway's death, she became frightened and wanted to leave. Jan realized what had alarmed her, became enraged, and struck her until she died. Jan was captured on his way to Chile and confessed to the crime on the 4th day of his arrest. The news shocked residents in the U.S., especially as it occurred exactly 5 years after Natalie's disappearance. Elizabeth Twitty expressed her grief, noting that justice had finally been served, albeit at the cost of another life. Jan was sentenced to 28 years in prison on January 11, 2012, for the premeditated crime against Stephanie Flores Ramirez. He was also ordered to pay $75,000 in compensation to the Ramirez family. In 2014, Jan was transferred from Pedro's Gordas prison to Chalet Pala prison, where he met a Peruvian woman who visited another inmate in 2010. They got married, but it turned out Jan was using her for his own purposes. He showed no signs of remorse or guilt for his actions. Meanwhile, in June 2011, David Holloway filed a petition in an Alabama court to have his daughter Natalie, who had gone missing in February 2005, declared legally deceased. Natalie's mother opposed this, hoping that Jan would confess to the crime and face trial. After a hearing, Judge Alan King ruled in favor of the declaration on January 12, 2012. On June 8, 2023, Jan was extradited to the United States and placed in Hoover City Jail in Alabama. The next day, he was charged with extortion and wire fraud, but he pleaded not guilty. However, on October 18, 2023, he entered a plea agreement admitting to murdering Natalie Holloway. He confessed to fatally bludgeoning her with a cinder block on May 30, 2005 and disposing of her body in the ocean for sharks to consume. Unfortunately, the confession made as part of the plea deal could not be used in court. Jan was sentenced to 20 years, which would run concurrently with his prison term in Peru. Natalie Holloway's disappearance remains one of the most notorious missing person cases in the U.S., and it is still an open case in Aruba. A series of cover-ups, corrupt deals, and bureaucratic delays effectively allowed the murder of an innocent young woman to go unpunished despite global attention to the investigation. The case of Brooke Skyler Richardson. In Ohio, the Richardson family, consisting of Kim, Scott, and their children Jackson and Skyler, seemed like a typical family. Skyler was a cheerleader who struggled with an eating disorder from a young age. Her mother, Kim, first noticed this when Skyler was 12 years old and refused to buy gum with more than 5 calories. As a flyer on the cheerleading squad, Skyler felt pressured to maintain a certain weight. This obsession with her body image led to a constant fear of gaining weight. During cheerleading season, Skyler started throwing up after meals to control her weight, which only made her issues worse. When the season ended, her struggles intensified. Skyler experienced episodes of binge eating, followed by periods of starvation or extreme dieting. Her parents grew concerned, but Skyler shut down whenever they tried to talk to her about it. They sought professional help from various doctors and therapists who eventually diagnosed Skyler with body dysmorphia, a condition where she obsessively focused on a perceived flaw in her appearance. In July 2016, Skyler began dating a friend's cousin, but the relationship didn't last long. By January 2017, she had moved on to a new boyfriend, Brandon, and seemed genuinely happy and healthy. Her parents noticed her weight gain and thought her eating disorder was under control. In February, Skyler picked out her prom dress, a tightly fitted gown that required her to be laced into it. During a family vacation in mid-March, she wore a 2-piece bathing suit and looked wonderful. Her mom, Kim, wanted her to start taking birth control pills to protect her health. In mid-April 2017, Skyler visited her mother's gynecologist to obtain a prescription for birth control. However, during the visit, the doctor informed Skyler that she was approximately 8 months pregnant. Skyler requested the doctor not to tell anyone, and her mother remained unaware of the real reason behind her tears. Skyler and her boyfriend Brandon attended the prom on May 5th despite her advanced pregnancy. 2 months later, on July 14, 2017, the police showed up at the Richardson home. They informed Skyler's parents, Kim and Scott, that they needed to speak to the teenager about something she may have witnessed. The police officers assured the parents that Skyler was not in trouble and took her at their word. Scott decided to drive Skyler to the police station, unsure of what awaited them. The police wanted to question Skyler regarding a call they received from a gynecologist's office. A patient of an OB/GYN doctor gave birth to a stillborn baby and buried it in their backyard. The police were informed and took Skyler, the patient, into custody for questioning. Her father was not allowed to be present during the initial interview. The police read Skyler her rights and shared the details of the doctor's report. According to the doctor, Skyler had discovered her pregnancy on April 26th, but later reported that the baby was not alive and had been buried in the backyard. Skyler admitted to the police that she had given birth to a stillborn baby girl on May 7, 2017. She explained that she delivered the baby in the bathroom, noticed it was not breathing, and had no heartbeat. Feeling the need to bury the baby, she retreated to the backyard, dug a shallow grave, and buried the body. To mark the spot, she placed a vase with a flower at the burial site. The police informed Skyler's parents, Kim and Scott, about the true reason for her detention. They were shocked to learn that Skyler had been pregnant, as they had no idea. They expressed sadness that Skyler had gone through this ordeal alone and without their support. Skyler revealed that she had named the baby Annabelle and claimed the father was a close friend's cousin, whom she briefly dated. Crime scene investigators searched the Richardson backyard, removing weeds and debris to uncover the baby's remains. Despite the challenges, they found several bones, including pieces of the skull, which they carefully collected and preserved. After more than 5 hours of questioning, Skyler and her parents were allowed to return home. However, 6 days later, the police contacted Skyler again, informing her that they had received new information from the coroner's office. They claimed that the baby's bones showed signs of burning, which Skyler vehemently denied. She insisted that she would never harm her child. The police suggested that Skyler might have tried to cremate the baby to hide the evidence, but she continued to deny any wrongdoing. However, Skyler suddenly changed her story, admitting that she may have used a lighter to try and cremate the baby's remains. She also stated that the baby might have been born alive and made a noise or even cried before dying. Skyler confessed to holding the newborn too tightly, which might have contributed to its death. During a lengthy interrogation, the police gathered enough evidence to arrest Skyler on a charge of reckless homicide. They believed she had suffocated her baby. After presenting the case to a grand jury, Skyler was indicted and arrested for aggravated murder, which carries a mandatory life sentence in Ohio. At her arraignment, Skyler pleaded not guilty to additional charges of voluntary manslaughter, abuse of a corpse, and endangering children. She spent the weekend in jail until her family secured a $50,000 bond. Skyler became the center of a media frenzy following her child's tragic death. The public judged and scrutinized every move she and her family made, taking a toll on their well-being. They retreated to the safety of their home, but even stepping outside became difficult due to threats and photographers. Despite her defense attorneys believing Skyler gave a false confession, the prosecution pressed forward with their case. Even when the medical examiner retracted her initial report of burning, the prosecution clung to Skyler's admission that she had attempted to cremate the remains. Throughout this period, Skyler's family endured immense stress and fear. The public scrutiny and threats made their lives unbearable, and they struggled to navigate a world under constant scrutiny. Skyler's defense attorneys worked tirelessly to defend her against the charges. Skyler's family raised the $50,000 bail, but as a condition of her release, she was ordered to wear an ankle bracelet. She remained confined to her home, avoiding public appearances. Over 12 months, Skyler's life took a different path. Her university plans were put on hold as she awaited trial for her baby's murder. The charges were serious, and the defense filed a motion to move the trial to a different county, but it was denied. Skyler faced the trial in the original jurisdiction, grappling with the emotional and psychological impact of the allegations and her isolation. Spending time with her dogs provided comfort and companionship as she awaited her trial. Her family stood by her, believing in her innocence and hoping the truth would come to light. Despite the challenges, Skyler remained determined to fight for her freedom. In July 2019, the state offered a plea deal. If Skyler pleaded guilty to the remaining charges, they would withdraw the aggravated murder charge. Skyler's parents were conflicted about the decision, but after careful consideration, Skyler turned down the plea deal. This decision terrified her parents, who wondered if she made the right choice, but they knew it was her decision, not theirs. Skyler went on trial on September 3, 2019 for the murder of her newborn baby girl. The prosecution presented as evidence a text message Skyler sent to her mother shortly after giving birth, saying she was happy and excited that her belly had returned to its normal size. They claimed this showed Skyler was relieved to be rid of her baby. The prosecution alleged that Skyler sent more texts to her mother and boyfriend within 24 hours of the baby's death, conveying her excitement and happiness. They pointed to phrases like, "I'm so excited, and I feel so much better this morning," as proof of her guilt. The state believed Skyler was thrilled about the baby's death and attempted to hide her guilt. The prosecution also claimed Skyler had no intention of keeping her baby and presented evidence that she had searched online for ways to get rid of the baby. They alleged that Skyler's mother had threatened that her life would end if she became pregnant, which instilled fear in Skyler. On the third day of the trial, a doctor testified that the baby's death was a violent homicide, but admitted she couldn't determine when the baby's skull fractures occurred. The defense challenged the doctor's findings, suggesting she may have been biased. The defense also questioned the doctor's methods, pointing out that she didn't examine the remains under a microscope or consult with an obstetrician. Another doctor, a fetal medicine specialist, testified that it was unlikely the baby was stillborn, citing Skyler's admission that she felt the baby moving inside her. The prosecution's case included shocking evidence, including images of the deceased baby's remains, which visibly Skyler during the trial. Skyler's reaction to seeing pictures of her baby's remains was to stare straight ahead, avoiding eye contact. This stoic behavior contrasted with her emotional response the previous day when the judge entered the room. Skyler's defense attorneys argued that her life was far from perfect even before the murder accusation. They claimed the prosecution's evidence was incomplete and misleading, and some texts were taken out of context. They emphasized that Skyler's frequent use of certain language did not prove she murdered her daughter. The defense highlighted Skyler's mental health struggles, particularly her long battle with an eating disorder. They presented evidence of her regular visits to a psychologist and nutritionist along with pictures showing her varying weights and appearances. They argued that despite her physical state, Skyler tried to comfort and care for the lifeless body after giving birth. Skyler's attorney explained that she intended to tell her family about the pregnancy, but never had the chance. According to her doctor, she had 8 to 10 weeks before delivery and planned to attend prom and graduate before telling her mother, whom she knew would be unsupportive. An obstetrician testified that the baby was stillborn, and Skyler's description of the baby's appearance suggested it was not a healthy newborn. The doctor pointed out that Skyler only gained 15 pounds during pregnancy, possibly restricting the baby's development due to her eating disorder. The defense aimed to cast doubt on Skyler's statements to the police, suggesting she only told them what they wanted to hear. They argued that other factors may have contributed to the baby's death, and Skyler did not harm the baby. Skyler Richardson's trial lasted for 1 week, after which the jury deliberated for just 4 hours before returning a verdict. She was acquitted of aggravated murder, involuntary manslaughter, and child endangerment, but convicted of abuse of a corpse, a felony that carries a sentence of up to 1 year in prison. The judge ordered her to be held in jail until her sentencing hearing, which took place the next day. During the sentencing hearing, Skyler apologized for her actions and acknowledged the harm she had caused. The judge strongly admonished her for her role in the tragic loss of her baby, believing that if she had made better decisions during her pregnancy, her child would still be alive today. The judge sentenced her to 3 years probation for abuse of a corpse, emphasizing that her actions were morally reprehensible and illegal. In November 2020, a judge granted her request to terminate her probation 2 years early, acknowledging her progress and agreeing that she no longer required supervision. Since being acquitted, Skyler has taken advantage of her opportunity to demonstrate her rehabilitation. She has completed 2 semesters of college and has been working part-time at the law firm that represented her. Although she has faced challenges in finding employment due to her probationary status, Skyler remains determined to pursue her career goals, including attending law school and becoming a public defender. The case of Celeste Mano. Celeste Mano was born on November 30th, 1997, in Melbourne, Victoria, Australia. She was the youngest of 2 children to parents, E.G. Darrow and Tony Mano, and grew up with her older brother Alessandro. Although her parents separated when she was young, her father remained involved in her life, providing financial support and maintaining a relationship with his children. Celeste was a sociable and active student who enjoyed sports, dance. Initially, she wanted to become a lawyer and enrolled at the University of Melbourne to study criminal and civil law. However, she later lost interest in law and switched to studying advertising and marketing. In February 2018, she landed a job at a rapidly growing e-commerce company. She rapidly advanced in her career, rising from a call center worker to the head of a department in just a few years. She was considered one of the company's most promising employees. Celeste has always been the center of attention, especially among men. However, she is very picky about her partners. Meanwhile, one of her colleagues, Lua Isiko, has had his eye on her since she started working at the company. He is almost 16 years older than her and has shown no signs of career ambition, remaining in the same subordinate position for many years. Despite his reserved nature, Louis Isioko was friendly and polite. He often asked Celeste out, but she consistently declined. Instead of taking the hint, Luisito chose to view her rejections as a challenge or a game. He believed that Celeste was playing hard to get and was determined to win her over. Despite her clear lack of interest, Luisito continued to try and draw her attention through various means. Celeste finds Luisito's attention annoying, but she tries to keep her cool, hoping that he will eventually lose interest or focus on someone else. However, Luisito's infatuation with Celeste grows stronger over time, becoming an obsession that everyone around him notices. Celeste confided in a close friend and colleague that she would never consider a romantic relationship with Luisito due to several reasons. Firstly, she found him odd and unpredictable. Secondly, she was not attracted to men lacking ambition and life goals. Lastly, their significant age difference was also a factor. Despite feeling pity for Luisito, she knew he had no chance with her. Luisito's relentless pursuit of Celeste led to a critical mistake. He neglected his work duties. As a result, his productivity plummeted, which did not go unnoticed by senior management. Luisito received 3 reprimands and warnings before being dismissed in early autumn 2019. As he gathered his belongings in the office, he appeared on the verge of tears, clearly devastated by the outcome. Celeste is relieved when Luisito finally leaves her alone, but she also feels guilty, thinking that her actions contributed to his firing. Mano, as a department manager, thanked Luisito for his years of service and escorted Luisito out of the building. As they parted, he patted Luisito on the back and sincerely wished him luck. The dismissed employee, Luisito, came to a surprising realization. He thought Celeste was hesitant to pursue an office romance because she was his superior and it might harm her career. Now, Luisito believed that there were no obstacles to their happiness, and they could be together. Overcome with emotion, Luisito suddenly kissed Celeste on the cheek. Shocked by his bold move, Celeste was speechless. She quickly turned around and fled back into the office without saying a word. Luisito misinterpreted her reaction, thinking that Celeste had feelings for him and that he shouldn't give up on pursuing her. After being fired, Luisito created a social media account and sent Celeste a friend request, which she initially accepted. However, when he began asking her to meet up and go out, she politely declined and eventually blocked him. Undeterred, Luisito created a new profile and sent her another friend request the next day. Celeste tried to ignore him, but he continued to comment on her photos, complimenting her appearance and suggesting they would make a great couple. To limit Luisito contact, Celeste adjusted her profile settings to restrict messages, comments, and posts to only her friends. Despite this, a week later, she started receiving romantic messages from an unknown number, which she suspected were from Luisito. The messages included poems he had written, admiring her beauty and trying to persuade her to go out with him. This was particularly concerning since Luisito had never had her personal phone number during their time working together, and she had only communicated with him through work channels. Celeste initially tried to address the stalker by answering one of his calls. Celeste explained to him that there was no possibility of a relationship and urged him to stop contacting her. Unfortunately, Luisito was not receptive to her message and instead continued to focus on how much he enjoyed hearing her voice. Despite Celeste's attempts to block him, Luisito managed to circumvent this by calling from different numbers each time. Feeling harassed, Celeste eventually changed her phone number. But to her surprise, Luisito was able to obtain her new number within a week. Celeste had been trying to protect herself from Luisito, a crazed fan, for about 6 months. Despite blocking Luisito's phone number and fake social media accounts and ignoring his messages, the harassment continued. The messages escalated from romantic to bold and threatening, followed by demands to meet Celeste. Celeste had no idea that Luisito had begun following her from work to her home, knowing her address. At first, she caught glimpses of Luisito near her home, but Celeste assumed it was because she was too nervous. However, when she realized that Luisito was actually following her, she knew she needed help. Celeste decided to seek police protection, hoping to obtain a restraining order that would prohibit the stalker from approaching her or her home. The police officers were unresponsive to Celeste's concerns, seeming to mock her request for help. They claimed that Luiseko had not done anything illegal, as writing explicit poems or fantasies in text messages is not against the law. Without evidence of Luiseko following were lurking near her home, Celeste was told to leave the police station. Celeste continued to be harassed by Luiseko on a regular basis. During the day, she would see his car parked across the street from her office, and at night, he would drive past her house several times. This constant presence made her feel uneasy. In August 2020, Celeste returned to the police station, this time providing photo and video evidence on her phone that showed Luiseko was indeed stalking her. A different officer took her statement and was more serious about the situation, expressing surprise at his colleague's previous indifference. He advised Celeste to go to court immediately, where a restraining order was issued against Luiseko, prohibiting him from contacting or approaching her in any way. Luiseko's sudden disappearance brought Celeste a sense of relief and freedom. However, that feeling did not last long. Less than a month later, she began receiving text messages from unknown numbers. The messages were from Luiseko, who initially begged her to retract his statement and drop the restraining order, arguing that it was interfering with their romantic relationship. Over time, his tone shifted from pleading to demanding. Celeste immediately reported the messages to the police, as Luiseko's actions were a clear violation of the restraining order. As a result, he was fined and warned that further violations would lead to severe consequences, including the possibility of jail time, if he continued to harass her. After this incident, Luiseko remained silent for almost 2 months, leading Celeste to believe that he had finally left her alone. Celeste met Chris Reedsdale in September 2020, and they quickly discovered they shared many common interests, life views, and goals, which led to a romantic relationship. She confides in Chris about her harassment by Luiseko, who has been silent for over a month but still worries her. Chris made a conscious effort to make Celeste feel safe and supported, showering her with care and attention. A month later, in early November, Celeste decided it was time to introduce Chris to her family over dinner. Her family welcomed Chris warmly. The next few weeks passed peacefully, and Luiseko made no further attempts to contact Celeste. She was happy, spending all her free time with Chris, and it seemed that she had finally forgotten about worrying about Luiseko. On November 15, 2020, they went on a date to a cafe, where they sat together enjoying each other's company. Celeste offered to take a selfie to capture the moment. Celeste loved the photo so much that she decided to use it as her profile picture on social media. By doing so, she also wanted to share the news of her new relationship and make it clear that things were getting serious. Chris also posted the photo on his page, along with a heartfelt caption expressing his love for Celeste. Sadly, this date turned out to be their last. After dropping Celeste off at home, Chris said goodbye, planning to see her again the next day. Celeste spent about an hour in the kitchen with her mother Eggy, before going to bed early to get ready for work the next morning. On November 16, 2020, Eggy was suddenly awakened around 4 a.m. by the sound of breaking glass. At first, she thought the noise was coming from outside, but then she heard more suspicious sounds, including banging, screams, and commotion, which seemed to be coming from within her house. Eggy quickly got out of bed, put on her robe, and rushed to her daughter Celeste's room. As she opened the door, she saw someone jumping away from Celeste's bed and escaping through a broken window. When Eggy turned on the light, she was shocked to see her daughter lying in a pool of blood, covered in cuts and small shards of glass. Celeste was struggling to breathe, her eyes wide open and looking up. Eggy immediately called an ambulance and tried to stem the bleeding from her daughter's deep wounds while she waited for help to arrive. Tragically, despite their best efforts, Celeste passed away before police and paramedics arrived. The medical examiners found over 20 stab wounds on the victim's body, with the fatal blow being a wound to her heart. After investigating the scene and comparing it to Eggy's testimony, the police concluded that the attacker broke into the Celeste's room through the window and carried out the attack in under 3 minutes, before the Celeste's mother entered the room. The attacker used a large butcher's knife, striking randomly, and the Celeste tried to defend herself, as evidenced by the numerous cuts on her arms. When asked if the Celeste had any enemies, Eggy mentioned Louis Sacco, who had been harassing the victim with calls and threatening messages for over a year. This information was confirmed by other family members, friends, and colleagues. The suspect left behind a large number of bloody fingerprints at the scene, as well as DNA on a fence he jumped over while fleeing, which was likely due to an injury to his hand. As a result, it was crucial to detain and interrogate Louis Sacco immediately, as he was the prime suspect in the case, and to verify and compare all the evidence and witness statements. Louis Sacco was immediately taken into custody but initially claimed to be innocent, professing his love for Celeste and insisting he could never hurt her. However, forensic analysis quickly proved him wrong. His bloody fingerprints were found both in Celeste's room and on the fence surrounding her property, tying him to the crime scene. Investigation revealed a prior restraining order, which prohibited Louis Sacco from approaching Celeste. Notably, the night before the crime, he bought a hammer and large knife at a local hardware store. The store's security cameras caught him purchasing the tools at checkout. It later emerged that he used these tools to carry out the violent crime, smashing through a window to enter Celeste's house and fatally stabbing her with the knife. The case against Louis Sacco was overwhelming, with evidence showing he had been watching his victim for a long time and knew everything about her. The final straw was when she posted a photo of her new boyfriend on social media. After that, Louis Sacco bought a knife and hammer and snuck into the victim's home at night to harm her. His actions seemed deliberate and planned. Louis Sacco's personal life was marked by instability. At 39, he had never married, still lived with his parents, had few friends, and had trouble holding down a job. He also had a family history of mental health issues, with a brother serving a long prison sentence for a serious crime. Louis Sacco's lawyer arguing that he needed specialized treatment rather than imprisonment. However, this claim outraged the victim's family, who feared that Louis Sacco would escape punishment. The psychiatric experts ultimately concluded that while Louis Sacco did have mental health issues, he was fully aware of his actions when he committed the crime. He had planned the details in advance, which meant he would have to stand trial. The murder trial is set for the fall of 2023, 3 years after Celeste's tragic death. In the years leading up to the trial, Louis Sacco attempted to argue that he was mentally ill and not responsible for his actions. He spent much of that time in a psychiatric ward. During the trial, Louis Sacco remained calm and detached, seemingly uninterested in the proceedings. He admitted to his guilt but claimed that his intention was not to take Celeste's life, but rather to win her love. However, the jury unanimously found him guilty on all counts. As a result, he was sentenced to 36 years in prison, with the possibility of parole only after serving 30 years. The Celeste parents drew attention to the fact that their daughter had reported the perpetrator to the police as early as 2020, seeking protection from him. However, her complaint was not accepted due to a loophole in the existing legislation. This led to calls for a change in the law, which would later be referred to as Celeste's Law. In June of 1995, it seemed like life couldn't possibly get any better for Mark and Donna Winger. The nuclear technician and his wife had been happily married for several years, and they had just adopted a newborn baby girl named Bailey. Donna was the oldest of 3 sisters in what they described as an incredibly close-knit family. The Dreschers grew to love Mark too. He was smart, Jewish. He was attractive and he was fun. Donna's sister, Jenny Levin, told the media, Donna just felt like she had found her person. After Mark and Donna Winger were married in 1989, he was offered a job, and the newlyweds settled in Springfield, Illinois. We always joked about the fact when one sister marries, that husband marries 3 sisters, Levin said. We shared our lives with Mark. Donna was working as an operating room technician, and Mark was a nuclear engineer. Donna couldn't have been happier. The only thing she would have liked to was to have a child, her stepfather Ira Drescher said. Donna's mother, Sarah Jane Drescher, said her daughter was overwhelmed when she learned that she could not get pregnant. But then one day while working at the hospital, a doctor told Donna that a teenager was looking to put her baby up for adoption. Adopting the child was an easy decision for her. She looked at me with tears when she said, Michelle, I knew it the minute they put the baby into my arms. She has always been mine, Donna's sister Michelle Hansen said. The Wingers welcomed baby Bailey into their home on June 1, 1995. Donna's family said the couple loved their new roles as parents. They seemed to have all the makings of a long and happy life together. Mark was just as excited to become a dad as Donna was to become a mom, Hansen said. Donna had met the woman who would eventually become her best friend, Diane Schultz, at the hospital. And with the arrival of Bailey, the two bonded over motherhood. But then everything turned dark. In August 1995, Donna took baby Bailey on a trip to Hollywood, Florida, to visit Donna's family. Her mother had just dropped the two of them off at the airport and hired a driver to pick them up in St. Louis, Missouri, and drive them back to Springfield. So after the visit, the two flew into St. Louis Airport and hopped in a cab driven by Roger Harrington with a 2-hour ride back to Springfield. During the course of the drive, Harrington reportedly began flirting with Donna and talking about drugs and orgies. Detective Charlie Cox, a police officer who investigated Donna's death, later said, "This gentleman started opening up to Donna about issues he was having. He had a voice in his head named Dom. Dom would tell him to do bad things. Recently, Dom was telling him to hurt people." After Donna safely arrived home with Bailey, she called the transit company to make a formal complaint about Harrington's behavior, and the driver was suspended. Cox later said that the driver started flirting with Donna, telling her he liked older women and even invited her to attend what he described as one of his sex parties. Donna had told her family that the ride was terrifying because he was driving erratically at 75 miles per hour. After the harrowing ride, Donna had been the victim of some strange phone calls, Weinhoff said. The family had believed that the driver had been stalking her and was a danger. Donna called the limousine company to file a complaint, and Harrington was suspended. Mark argued his wife to write down the story in case they might need it. Police later found the note describing Donna's harrowing ride in her handwriting at the crime scene. Donna also told Mark about the experience, and though he played a part of the supportive husband and helped her file the complaint, it turned out that he had ulterior motives for doing so. Just days later, Mark invited Harrington to their home, perhaps under the pretense of helping him get his job back. On the August 29, 1995, the cab driver wrote Mark's name, address, and the time on a scrap of paper in his car, drove to the Wingers' home, walked inside with a coffee cup and a pack of cigarettes, and was shot twice in the head. Mark Winger then called 911 and told the dispatcher he'd just shot a man who was killing his wife. He informed police that he'd been walking on the treadmill in the basement when he heard a commotion upstairs. He grabbed his gun, went to investigate, and found Harrington swinging a hammer at Donna. In an effort to defend his wife, he'd shot the man twice. Police arrived on the scene to find that both Donna and Harrington still had a weak pulse. Mark was in a back bedroom rolling back and forth in total shock. When former Springfield Police Detective Charlie Cox arrived at the Wingers' home, he remembered they could see the victims from the front door. Donna was clinging to life, said Sangamon County Assistant State Attorney Steve Weinholt. She had been hit no less than 7 times in the head with a hammer. The second victim, a white man, had suffered 2 gunshot wounds to the head, but still had a pulse when police arrived, said Weinholt. It was quite chaotic. Pulse when police arrived, said Weinhoff. It was quite chaotic, Cox said. I knew that they were probably going to be transporting the victim soon, so I wanted to try and get identification on the male suspect. Cox found the man's wallet and was able to identify him as Roger Harrington. Police recovered a bloody hammer near the 2 bodies and found Mark's .45 caliber semi-automatic handgun, a yellow mug, and a pack of cigarettes on the same dining table. They also noticed that Harrington's car had been parked against traffic facing the wrong direction. At the crime scene, Cox said Mark was very upset and very emotional, and that he repeatedly asked who the man he'd killed was. Cox avoided identifying Harrington and tried to calm Mark down. As police combed through the scene, Mark asked police if the intruder's name was Roger. Cox confirmed that it was. Mark was shocked and he said, "Oh my gosh, that's the man who's been harassing my wife this week," Cox said. Cox, who was familiar with Harrington after he'd lived in a trailer park owned by Cox, believed Harrington might have snapped. "I knew him as a very volatile type subject. He and his wife rented a trailer for me," Cox said. Knowing what I knew about Mr. Harrington in the past, how quick he was to anger, I thought that very well he could have gone over there to try to get his job back. There's a hammer laying right there on the table. He picks it up and goes into a rage. Then the husband shoots the bad guy. Tragically, both victims succumb to their injuries. After learning about Donna's previous run-in with Harrington and listening to Mark's version of events, the police closed the case within days, listing Roger Harrington as the culprit. Because once police examined the scene and listened to Mark's story, detectives concluded that he had acted in self-defense. The case was closed in about 48 hours, Weinhold said. But Harrington's family insisted from the beginning that their son was harmless. He was no troublemaker. He was a good kid. He wouldn't even strike at anybody, his mother, Ellen Harrington, said. I don't think he would hurt anybody, and I don't think he was crazy. So it seemed like Mark Winger was going to get away with murder. Donna's mother spoke to the media about the evening and the family received the news of her daughter's murder. It was 4 in the morning and I said, Jenny, it's Mom. Something terrible has happened, Sarah Jane Drescher said of her call to Levin. We sat there in my room just crying at this unimaginable loss. Levin said. In the following months, Donna's mother and sister took turns traveling to Illinois to help take care of Bailey. I loved Mark because he loved Donna, and that's what was important to me, Sarah Jane Drescher said. But I had to be very careful because I did not want to ruin my relationship with him because I did not want to ruin my relationship with the baby. I wanted to be a grandma, and Bailey made me a grandma. Mark was now a single father raising his infant daughter on his own. Donna's family initially flew to Illinois to help out, but they couldn't stay, and they suggested Mark hire a nanny. In January 1996, he met 23-year-old Rebecca Simic, who was searching for a nanny job in the area. Rebecca told reporters it just felt like Bailey was the one that really needed me the most. She had been through so much already at the age of 3 months. Rebecca was wonderful with Bailey, and even Donna's family agreed that she was like an angel sent to help Mark. While she felt a little uncomfortable in the house where 2 people had died violently, she was dedicated to giving Bailey a good childhood despite the trauma of losing her mother. I didn't want to like Rebecca, but it was hard not to like her, Levin said. Seeing her with Bailey, there was really nothing bad we could say about her. Meanwhile, Rebecca's role at Mark's home had begun to evolve. When you live with someone and you're taking care of a child together, it's very easy to kind of play house. Rebecca said later on. Rebecca told the media that she was blown away by what the infant had been through in such a short time. Mark made me feel like I was like an angel sent to him from God or Donna, and it was my purpose to make this family whole again, Rebecca said. She lost 2 mothers by the time she was 3 months old, and she was so smiley, Rebecca said. I wanted to get in there and say, I'm going to help and I'm going to make this little girl's life better. Mark helped Rebecca feel at ease in her new role. After a few months, the two found themselves sharing conversation and a glass of wine at the end of a long day, and then one thing led to another as their relationship turned intimate. Within the year, Rebecca was pregnant with Mark's child. The couple eloped in Hawaii in October 1996, just 14 months after Donna's death. I remember asking him how he could move on so quickly, Rebecca later recalled, and he explained to me that when you have a good marriage, it's natural for you to just want that again. Rebecca said Mark had told her he wasn't able to have children, so she said she was very surprised when she found out she was pregnant with his child only months after moving in. Obviously, I wasn't careful. It was just kind of a shock, she said. Mark, on the other hand, was thrilled, Rebecca recalled. Felt like it was a victory to him, she said. Mark put pressure on me to marry him and have children with him. Rebecca said that Mark, who is Jewish when they met, even started going to church with her. She said he told her they could raise a family in a Christian home. I would be honored to be your husband and blessed if you were my wife, Mark wrote in a letter to Rebecca. March Rabbi Michael Datz asked him about his change in faith, and he said that Mark explained, Judaism is just too difficult and unforgiving. Rabbi Datz didn't understand, asking, Mark, I don't know what you're talking about. What do you need forgiveness for? He said Mark didn't respond. But then it seemed like Mark was trying almost a little too hard to leave the past behind. 16 months after his wife's death, Mark told Sarah Jane Drescher that he was going to sell the house where her daughter Donna had died and buy another one just outside of town. He and Rebecca had started a family of their own, and he started cutting ties with Donna's parents. I received a letter from Mark one day saying to me I could not be called Grandma, Sarah Jane Drusher said. I wrote him back and I begged him, please let her call me Grandma. And he said, I'm sorry. There's no way I am going to allow her to call you Grandma. And that's the way it is. Sarah said she mourned that loss for a long time. Bailey Simic, now 25, told reporters that her grandmother and grandfather, Ira Drescher, would send a birthday card to her every year. I always remember asking my mom, who's Sarah Jane and Ira, she said. My mom would always explain, like, those are Donna's parents, and they just want to let you know that, like, they love you and that they remember you. Eventually, Mark sold the house where Donna had died and moved with his new wife to the suburbs outside of Springfield. Things seemed great on the surface. They had 3 children together and Rebecca raised Bailey as her daughter. Though chaotic, their life seemed almost perfect. Mark was a loving partner and a very involved father. That would all change quite soon. One day in early 1999, when Mark was feeling ill, Rebecca took him to the emergency room in the hospital where Donna had worked before her death. There, they saw Donna's best friend and co-worker, Deanne Schultz. She seemed upset to see Mark, and Rebecca remembered that Deanne had acted strangely when she first came on Bailey's nanny, as if she were anxious to stay involved in Bailey's life. After they returned home, Mark commented that that may not be the last they heard from Deanne. He was right. In February 1999, Deanne dropped a bombshell on the police, revealing that she and Mark had been having an affair before Donna's death. She said that at one point, he'd remarked to her that things would be easier for them if Donna was dead. She told them that after Donna's faithful ride with Roger Harrington, Mark said that he needed to get that driver to the house. All you'd need to do is find the body, he told her. Diane never thought Mark was serious, but when Donna turned up dead soon after, she knew he had done it. Mark had threatened her not to tell anyone about the things he'd said, and she'd attempted suicide several times while struggling with her guilt. After seeing him in the hospital, she decided she couldn't keep quiet any longer. After hearing Diane's story, police decided to take a closer look at the evidence from the day of the murders. The more they thought about what they'd once assumed was an open and shut case, the more questions they had. Why were there no signs of forced entry into the Winger home that August day? Why would Roger Harrington bring his cup of coffee and cigarettes into the house with him if he'd planned to attack Donna? And why would he use the Winger's hammer as a weapon when he had a tire iron and a knife in his car? At that point, investigators came upon 3 never-before-seen Polaroid photos taken the day of the murders. They'd been, with the evidence collected in a civil suit, Mark had filed against the transportation company that had employed Harrington. The position of the bodies in the photos showed that Mark's version of events were not possible. Mark Winger had stated that Roger Harrington was kneeling right next to Donna Winger's head, and he was beating her with a hammer, Weinhoft explained. He stated that he shot him and that the man fell backward so that his feet remained near Donna's head. In reality, the Polaroid photographs show the exact opposite. Blood spatter experts agreed. Cox later told the media, I was ashamed of the way the investigation went. I heard Roger Harrington's family. I ran his name through hell for no reason. I mean, he was an innocent victim. It had become clear that Mark was the real murderer behind the scenes the whole time. Rebecca Simic was left to make sense of the tragedy. She had no idea what Mark was capable of, and afterward, she moved her 4 children out of Springfield to feel safer. While Mark had tried to keep Bailey away from Donna's family, Rebecca encouraged them to be reunited. We'd been hurt a lot by the same person, Rebecca said, but it didn't break us. Donna's family and Rebecca spoke to reporters about the horrific realization that Mark was a manipulative killer hiding behind the mask of a brilliant engineer and a kind, loving husband and father. In December 1999, more than 4 years after the murders, the Springfield State Journal-Register ran an article based on allegations in the civil lawsuit that Mark had arranged the murder himself and killed both his wife and Harrington. The allegations were based on a blood spatter expert hired by BART Transportation in the case after the arrest of their employee, Harrington. Everything came to a head. It changed everything, Rebecca said of the article. I mean, it went from Mark as the hero who was defending his wife, this noble stand-up guy that every man wanted to pat on the back, to a manipulative, deviant murderer. As the detectives continued their reinvestigation, they learned that Harrington's roommate, Susan Collins, had initially told police that someone asked to meet with Harrington on the day of the murders and that she'd seen Harrington on the phone arranging that meeting. Inside Harrington's car, they found a note written on a bank deposit slip with Mark's name, his address, and the time to be there. Roger Harrington was not an intruder, but rather he was lured into that home by Mark Winger, Weinhoff said. Deanne Shelton's cooperation with police and evidence that raised questions about Mark's story prompted the voluntary dismissal of the civil suit against BART Transportation. I didn't see it coming, Rebecca said. I didn't know that this whole investigation was brewing. I never thought the whole time that they thought my husband was a diabolical murderer. A warrant was issued for Mark's arrest, and he was taken into custody while at work. I had made plans to go to McDonald's Playlander, Becca recalled. We were there and I got a phone call and it was Mark's secretary, and she told me that Mark had just been arrested. I was just sick. My whole body kind of went numb, and I just couldn't believe it. I was shaking so badly and I just remembered feeling so scared. I felt that I owed it to him and to my kids to just stand by him, she said. Hanson, Donna's sister, said she didn't feel relieved following Mark's arrest. I still wanted to believe he was innocent, she said. Here's this person that I know in handcuffs, and what's going to happen? Bailey was just 6 years old at the time of Mark's arrest. She said no longer having her father home was scary. I just remember everyone just trying to remain calm and kind of, at the time, being like, Dad's just going away for a while and that he'll be back soon, she said. But that was no longer possible. On August 23, 2001, Mark Winger was indicted for the murders of Donna Winger and Roger Harrington. At the trial in May 2002, a visibly shaky Deanne testified against Mark. The court granted her immunity in exchange for her testimony, though there was no evidence linking her to anything other than keeping Mark's terrible secret. Mark was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. One of the key points the prosecution had to prove was that Harrington had gone to the house to meet with the Wingers, not to commit a murder. They presented the cigarettes and coffee mug that he'd brought inside, as well as the weapons he'd left in his car and the note with Mark's name and address. Mark's attorney argued that Harrington was mentally ill, that he behaved erratically, and that these traits indicated he was capable of murder. When prosecutors presented the Polaroid showing the position of the bodies before they were removed from the scene, Mark's attorney argued throughout the trial that first responders could have moved the bodies. It's our belief that Roger comes to the house, he's allowed into the home, now retired Detective Jim Graham said. There were no signs of forced entry, and he was executed at that time. Hearing the gunshot, Donna Winger then comes from the bathroom to investigate. He then beats his wife to death with a hammer. Mark then calls 911. In the 911 call, someone can be heard moaning in the background when Mark tells the operator he can hear his baby crying and hangs up. He had told the operator there was a bullet in Harrington's head, but when police arrived, Harrington had been shot twice. Diane also gave damning testimony at the trial, saying that Mark told her it would be easier if Donna just died. I thought it was crazy talk, she said during her cross-examination. After a chance meeting years later, Diane testified that she confronted Mark in the hopes of gathering information and asked him how he lived with himself, and that he'd replied that he had found Jesus Christ and was forgiven. She said he warned her that if she ever said anything, they would both be in trouble. I didn't think that anybody would believe her, Rebecca said. I just thought if Mark truly did that, she would have come forward right away. Mark's defense argued that Diane was emotionally unstable and just a woman who had been scorned. Diane Schultz's testimony was able to demonstrate that in reality, Mark was obviously unhappy, unfaithful, and had specifically talked about wanting to kill his wife, Weinhold said. Schultz was granted immunity for her testimony, he added. There was no direct evidence that directly linked Deanne to actively participating in this crime. In the end, she was such a valuable witness as it relates to presenting the motive. After a trial that lasted 3 weeks, the jury found Mark Winger guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. Rebecca said she believed he would be going home with them. After the verdict, she said the words guilty rang through her head and that she wanted the earth to open up and swallow me. Sarah Jane Drescher and her daughters, Donna's sisters, were with her when they heard the verdict. The 3 of us just embraced and cried, she said. And the story gets even more twisted because 4 years later, Mark was also sentenced to an additional 35 years in prison when he tried to hire a hitman to kill Deanne or testifying against him. He even attempted to put out a hit against a childhood friend who had refused to pay his bail. Helen Harrington was relieved and grateful that her son had been vindicated of Donna's murder. "We knew that Roger was innocent and it finally got proven," she said. "He was branded a murderer at the time, but then all this came to an end." The police also had to come to terms with the faulty initial investigation. "I was ashamed of the way the investigation went," Cox said. "I heard Roger Harrington's family. I ran his name through hell for no reason. I mean, he was an innocent victim." The police department had too hastily closed the case and turned a blind eye to some red flags. "And to right such a wrong, it felt great," Bram added. But Rebecca said there wasn't any closure for her or her family. "When we lose someone, we gather. We have a funeral," Rebecca shared. "But when someone goes to prison, well, what do? You're just kind of left with this emptiness and this hole that you can't really have closure with that." "It wasn't just him being sentenced to life," she said. "We were sentenced to a life of a father in prison." Bailey Simic says she missed having her father around while growing up. "It was really hard being in school seeing all the other kids have their dads in that relationship," she said. "And now suddenly, I couldn't just go to my dad's room or have him pick us up from school or anything like that." Ben Simic was only a year old when his dad went to prison. "I can look at the pictures and look at myself and say, that kid has no idea. He was way too young to know anything that was going on," he said. Rebecca had to move out of Springfield with her kids, and the home that she'd bought with Mark was foreclosed. She had been a stay-at-home mom for 7 years, so she had no option but to file for bankruptcy. "I didn't have anything to give my kids. Everything had been taken away. All I had was love," she said. Rebecca never remarried as far as we know. She raised all 4 of the children on her own, and Bailey has since reunited with Donna's family. "It was so incredible to see that there's this whole big family that loves me. And Sarah Jane still has my baby picture on her kitchen counter with all of her other grandkids even though we've been gone for so long," she said. "We've been hurt a lot by the same person, but it didn't break us," Rebecca said. Although Sarah Jane Drescher says there will never be closure for the murder of her daughter, the family has worked together to set up Donna's Fund, which is a part of Women in Distress, an organization that works to provide shelter for women trying to escape abuse. "I think her legacy will live on through people that we help," Levin said, "and through the beautiful memories that we have of her." So what do you think of this crazy, twisted case of murder uncovered? Would Mark Winger still be walking scot-free today if his former lover, Diane Schultz, hadn't developed a guilty conscience? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section, and don't forget to like, share, and hit the subscribe for more in-depth coverage of some of the most manipulative murders of all time. The case of Bobby and McLeod. Bobby Ann lived with her parents, Donna and Adrian, and her brother Lee in Plymouth, a lively coastal town in southwest England. On November 20th, 2021, Bobby Ann left her home around 5:45 p.m., heading to the bus stop on Sheepstore Road. She had told her father that she was going downtown to meet her boyfriend and friends, something she had done many times before. The bus stop was familiar to her and she reached it within a few minutes. An hour and a half passed and Bobby Ann's mother, Donna, sent her a text to check if she had arrived safely. When Bobby Ann didn't reply, Donna tried calling her, but her daughter also didn't answer. This was unusual and Donna became worried. About an hour later, Bobby Ann's boyfriend called her parents, asking if she was at home. He was concerned because Bobby Ann hadn't shown up for their scheduled meeting and he hadn't been able to reach her by phone. Bobby Ann's parents called all her friends, but none of them knew her whereabouts. With growing concern, they reported her missing to the police. It was already past 9 p.m. The next morning, November 21st, police along with McLeod's family and volunteers began a thorough search of the area. Flyers with Bobby Ann's picture were distributed across the city, and her disappearance was shared on social media and local news outlets. Bobby Ann's brother, Lee, made a desperate plea on social media, urging everyone in Plymouth to help search for her. He asked people to report any information or sightings to him. The police investigation revealed that Bobby Ann had planned to take a bus downtown, but she never boarded it. However, a local resident came forward, stating that he had seen Bobby and at the bus stop the previous evening. This new information confirms that Bobby did indeed arrive at the bus stop, but did not get on the bus for unknown reasons. Further evidence was found when police discovered Bobby's wireless headphones in the walkway behind the bus stop. The area was sealed off and police officers conducted a meticulous search of the surrounding area, scouring every inch for potential clues. Evidence was collected along the girl's usual route from her home to the bus stop, as well as on surrounding streets. Since Bobby was last seen at the bus stop but never boarded the bus, and her headphones were found nearby, authorities suspected she might have been kidnapped. Investigators attempted to locate her cell phone, which was detected within the city limits, but they couldn't pinpoint its exact location. All calls to her number went straight to voicemail. The police eventually found Bobby's phone. On November 22nd, police, family members, and volunteers conducted a thorough search of the area surrounding Bobby's home, but unfortunately, no leads were found. The following evening, November 23rd, the police announced the discovery of a woman's body at Bevazen Beach, approximately 8 miles from the bus stop where Bobby was last seen. The body was found in a wooded area near the shore, about half a mile inland. The body found was indeed Bobby's. Her death was a devastating blow to her loved ones. A vigil was held in her memory near the bus stop where she was last seen, and the family expressed their gratitude to everyone who attended. During the vigil, Bobby's mother, Donna, sent heartfelt love to her daughter. On behalf of her family, she expressed gratitude to everyone for coming together during this difficult time. She admits that although their beautiful Bobby's life was taken, she will always be remembered. Bobby and McLeod's brother, Lee McLeod, paid a heartfelt tribute to his sister by sharing a childhood photo of the two of them. The picture showed the siblings smiling and wearing their primary school uniforms. In a message accompanying the photo, Lee expressed his grief and love for his sister. He wrote, "You didn't deserve this. You were a beautiful and talented girl, and I'm grateful to have had you as my little sister. I'll always treasure the adventures and journeys we had. Rest easy now." The police investigation revealed that Bobby's body was found naked, but the medical examiner found no evidence of rape. However, she had suffered severe head and facial injuries, including 14 lacerations. The investigation has made progress. A man who walked into the police station on November 23rd, the same day the body was found. At 1:17 p.m., he approached the police and offered to provide information about the missing girl, stating that he wanted to help the police and her family. That man was Cody Ackland, 24, admitted to the crime. He confessed to kidnapping and killing Bobby and providing details of the offense. Cody lived fairly close to the bus stop where Bobby was last seen, and he was taken into custody as the prime suspect. Cody confirmed that he had abducted Bobby from the bus stop, despite never having met her before the evening of the incident. Cody Ackland was a talented musician and guitarist in a local indie rock band, but he had a dark secret. Behind his charming facade, Cody was fascinated with serial killers and had a list of idols that included notorious murderers such as Joseph D'Angelo Jr., Andre Chikatilo, Ivan Milet, Fred West, and Tommy Sells. However, he worshipped a criminal he considered a hero, Ted Bundy, who confessed to killing at least 30 people. Cody's obsession with Ted was evident in the content he consumed. Investigators found 3,216 images on his phone, many of which were disturbing and reminiscent of horror movies. In the lead up to a young girl named Bobby's death, Cody's internet searches became increasingly focused on serial killers and crimes. He also researched remote locations on Dartmoor, potential weapons, and browsed online stores for items such as baseball bats, ski masks, and waterproof clothing. However, his clandestine activities eventually led him to commit a serious crime. In a tragic twist of fate, Bobby unknowingly crossed paths with Cody. On the evening of the incident, Bobby arrived at the bus stop around 6:15 p.m. Cody, who was driving his Ford Fiesta in the area, spotted her and decided to target her. According to Cody's own confession, Bobby's resemblance to his ex-girlfriend was merely a coincidence and not the reason for the attack. In reality, Cody had been planning to carry out a violent act for some time and was simply looking for a victim. The police investigation concluded that Cody would have carried out his plan regardless of who he encountered, and that Bobby N was a random victim. Cody parked his car behind a bus stop after spotting Bobby N. He observed her for a few minutes to ensure no one else was around. Then he retrieved a hammer he had previously purchased and crept up to Bobby N, striking her twice in the head. Believing she was dead, Cody returned to his car and began to leave the scene. However, as he drove away, he noticed that Bobby N was alive and attempting to get up. Cody returned to the bus stop, moved Bobby N's semi-conscious body to his car, and drove 20 miles to the Belover Forest parking lot in Dartmoor. At 7:45 p.m., he stopped in the parking lot, which was located in a wooded area. His intention was to leave Bobby N's body there, but he discovered that she was still alive and conscious. Despite this, Cody did not seek help or take Bobby N to a hospital. Instead, he assisted her out of the car. When Bobby N expressed her fear, Cody responded by saying he was scared as well, admitting that he had never committed such an act before. He then struck Bobby N 12 times on the head with the hammer. In an attempt to destroy evidence, Cody burned Bobby N's purse. Even after inflicting severe injuries on Bobby N, she was still able to make a noise, prompting Cody to express his surprise for her resilience. Cody had one last opportunity to save Bobby N's life, but he chose not to take it. Instead, he claimed to have ended her suffering. He then placed her body in the trunk of his car and drove approximately 30 miles to Bavazon, where he hid the body after removing his shoes, clothing, and jewelry. He returned home around 10 p.m. and went to bed. The next day, Cody traveled to Tamerton Foley, north of Plymouth, and disposed of the hammer he used in the crime by throwing it into the River Tamar. He also discarded a bag containing his and Bobby N's blood-stained clothing in nearby allotments in Coombe Lane. Despite a thorough search, the hammer was never found. On November 21st, Cody spent the day socializing with friends, attending a pizza gathering, a band rehearsal, and a night out at the pub. Those who saw him that day noticed he was in an unusually good mood, happy, joking, and affectionate with his friends. The following day, November 22nd, Cody continued to enjoy himself, buying popcorn and watching a movie at the theater. Meanwhile, police, family, and volunteers were searching for Bobby and Cody was keeping up with the latest news on his phone. On November 23rd, Cody went to work at a car service company. During his lunch break, he sent a message to a chat room for his music group, expressing his love for them, and also texted his mother to tell her how much he loved her. Shortly after, he went to the police station and confessed to the crime. Shortly after, Cody's band members have issued a statement on Facebook announcing that they are disbanding the group with immediate effect as a mark of respect for the late Bobby N McLeod. They expressed their shock and disbelief at the tragic events, saying their thoughts and prayers are with Bobby N's family and friends, who must be devastated by their loss. The band members explained that they cannot continue as a group and have decided to go their separate ways. They will not be making any further comments at this time. In a separate development, police revealed that they had found physical evidence linking Cody to the crime scene. This included Bobby N's DNA in his car and on his sneakers. The trial of Cody Ackland took place in May 2022. Cody's attorney, Ray Tully, stated that psychiatrists had evaluated Cody and found that he did not have a mental illness. However, Cody had experienced a difficult childhood and had been diagnosed with ADHD, dyslexia, depression, and anxiety. By the age of 19, Cody had a 7-year history of depression. Ray explained that Cody had not received much support or comfort from his family or school life. Specifically, Cody's father had not provided him with the guidance and support he needed. During sentencing, Judge Robert Linford told Cody that his actions were premeditated and brutal. The judge stated that the evidence showed Cody had intended to kill his victim and that the crime was a prolonged and horrific ordeal for the victim. The judge emphasized that Cody had planned and carried out the murder and that the victim's life had been brutally cut short. As a result, Cody Ackland, 24, was sentenced to life in prison. He will serve a minimum of 31 years before being eligible to apply for parole. The case of Ali Kemp. Alexandra Ali Elizabeth Kemp was born October 11, 1982, in Leawood. She was the oldest of 3 children and the only daughter of her parents. After graduating high school with honors, Alexandra enrolled at Kansas State University. Following her freshman year, she returned to her hometown of Leawood for summer break. During her break, Alexandra took a part-time job at a local outdoor swimming pool near her parents' house, where her younger brother Tyler already worked. The pool was a quiet neighborhood spot, catering mainly to local residents, and it still operates today. On June 18, 2002, Alexandra reported to work on an overcast day because resulted in fewer visitors than usual. At 5 p.m., Tyler arrived at the pool to start his shift, but his sister Alexandra was nowhere to be found. Her phone and purse were still on the table where she usually sat, which made Tyler confused and worried. He immediately called his parents to report that Alexandra had vanished. Their father, Roger Kemp, rushed to the scene and began searching for his daughter. He first checked the pool, but it was empty. Next, he went to the small pump room near the pool, which contained equipment for water purification, a ladder, and other items. Upon entering the pump room, Roger didn't see anything out of the ordinary at first. However, he soon noticed a leg protruding from under a tarp. As he lifted the tarp, he was met with a horrific sight. His daughter Alexandra, brutally beaten and naked from the waist down, with multiple bruises on her face and body. Roger quickly called 911 and spoke with the operator. When the ambulance arrived, Roger was performing CPR on his daughter. The paramedics took Alexandra to the hospital, but despite their best efforts, she sadly did not survive. Alexandra was declared dead shortly after arrival at the hospital. An examination revealed that the cause of death was strangulation, despite the presence of multiple severe injuries. A thorough investigation found no evidence of forced intimacy, although her body was partially unclothed. The police collected DNA samples from Alexandra's body and secured the pool area, searching for clues to identify the perpetrator. Evidence of a struggle was evident in the room where Roger discovered Alexandra's body, including her flip-flops found in separate locations. Additionally, an open bottle of antiseptic gel and its cap were found at the scene. A few days later, while the police continued to investigate, Alexandra's family and hundreds of mourners gathered to pay their respects at a funeral ceremony. Phil Howes, Alexandra's boyfriend since high school, was initially suspected in her death. As a pool administrator, he worked the morning shift on the day of her death, and Alexandra arrived at noon to start her 5-hour shift. Although Phil often stayed after work to spend time with Alexandra, he left promptly after his shift that day because they had plans for the evening. Despite being an early suspect, Phil had a solid alibi and was quickly cleared by the police. In an interview with detectives, Phil mentioned that Alexandra often felt uncomfortable being alone at work because some of the lawn maintenance workers would stare at her and try to flirt. The police investigated the lawn workers, but each of them had an alibi. However, the inquiry wasn't entirely fruitless. Several workers reported seeing a suspicious man with a video camera lurking in the bushes near the pool the day before Alexandra's death, apparently watching the female lifeguards in swimsuits. The police were given conflicting reports about Alexandra's final hours. Some people said she left the scene in an old Ford pickup truck, while others mentioned different circumstances. A study of Alexandra's mobile phone activity revealed that she had made plans with a friend, Laurel, to meet on the day she died. However, Alexandra didn't show up. When Laurel went to the police station to give her account of events, she explained that Alexandra had asked her to come to the pool to keep her company until her shift ended. According to Laurel, the pool was empty that day due to the poor weather, which made Alexandra anxious. When Laurel arrived at the pool at around 2:30 p.m., she didn't see Alexandra anywhere. Instead, a man she didn't know emerged from the pool house and waved at her with a smile. Laurel thought this man might be Alexandra's boss, and she decided to leave so as not to get her friend in trouble for socializing during work hours. At the time, she had no reason to think that anything was amiss. The police investigation led them away from Alexandra's workplace and to a completely different suspect. As a witness, Laurel provided a detailed description of the person she believed committed the crime. The police used this description to create a sketch of the suspect, who was identified as a white man around 30 years old, with a stocky build, short brown hair, and driving a 1980 Ford pickup truck. The suspect's identity was narrowed down when someone recognized the description as matching James Strader, a local mechanic who owned an old Ford pickup truck. James was questioned by the police and appeared to match the sketch, but he denied any involvement in Alexandra's death. His employer verified his alibi, stating that James was at work on the day of the murder. As a result, James was released from custody. While the police had eliminated James as a suspect, forensic analysis of evidence collected from the crime scene revealed male DNA on an antiseptic gel tube and on Alexandra's body. Unfortunately, the DNA did not match anyone in the police database, leaving the case still unsolved. Alexandra's family, friends, and boyfriend were ruled out as suspects after DNA tests showed no match with the DNA samples found on her body. The investigation was driven by Alexandra's father, Roger Kemp, who was determined to find his daughter's killer. After losing his child, Roger felt like he had lost his purpose in life. However, he found a new reason to keep going: justice for Alexandra. In an interview, Roger explained his approach: "You can either give up or keep fighting. I chose to fight." Impressed by his dedication, the police department gave Roger a workspace where he could collect and share information and collaborate with the investigators. As they explored all available leads, Roger and the investigators contacted the popular TV show America's Most Wanted and asked them to feature Alexandra's case. The show's producers agreed, and her story was aired. The episode generated hundreds of calls from viewers with potential tips. Although the authorities thoroughly investigated each lead, none of them led to a breakthrough, and the case stalled once again. In February, after Alexandra's death, a promising new lead emerged. Following a thorough investigation, police in Utah apprehended a suspect. 3 separate witnesses, including 2 women and a 14-year-old girl, came forward to report being forced into intimate encounters with a man. He had managed to evade capture initially, but was eventually tracked down and arrested in Utah. The arrested individual was identified as James Strader, the same person who had been questioned by Kansas police earlier. Notably, James bore a strong physical resemblance to the suspect's composite sketch. James was questioned by the police, but they failed to collect his DNA sample at the time. This might have been because his employer had convinced the police that James was at work on the day of the crime and had not left the premises. Despite this, James denied any involvement in Alexandra Kemp's death. Although he resembled the suspect in the composite sketch, James claimed he had not been near the pool on the day of the crime. He eventually provided a DNA sample for analysis. The results indicates that his DNA did not match the DNA found on Alexandra's body or the antiseptic gel tube. James was later imprisoned for unrelated charges, and the investigation into Alexandra Kemp's death hit a dead end once again. A year after Alexandra's death, the police still had no leads. Roger Kemp, Alexandra's father, and Phil House, her boyfriend, continued to fight for justice. Phil, who was also the president of the student community, sent the composite sketch of the suspect to students at other universities via email and asked them to watch an episode of America's Most Wanted that featured Alexandra Kemp's case. A year had passed, but the police and relatives' efforts had yielded no results in the Alexandra Kemp case. Undeterred, Roger Kemp, Alexandra's father, continued his quest for justice. He reached out to the America's Most Wanted program again, requesting a rerun of the episode about Alexandra's death. The show's creators asked if there were any new developments, and although Roger replied that there were none, his determination impressed them, leading to the episode being aired again. The rerun generated a fresh wave of calls to the police, prompting Roger to offer a $25,000 reward for any information that could help identify the person responsible for his daughter's death. The city of Leawood authorities increased the reward to $50,000. Roger also distributed flyers featuring his daughter's photo, a sketch of the suspect, and details about the reward. As Roger drove along the highway, he noticed billboards and realized they could be an effective way to raise awareness about the case. He began contacting advertising agencies to inquire about the cost of posting the information on a billboard. When he called the Lamar Advertising Company, The owner refused to take his money, offering to display the information on multiple billboards for free instead. Raja decided to publicize a sketch of the suspect and reward information on billboards along a major highway. The police received hundreds of tips, which took time to investigate. Notably, multiple tips mentioned the same individual, Teddy Hoover, who owned an old Ford pickup truck and worked in pool maintenance. His appearance matched the suspect's sketch, making it unlikely to be a coincidence. The police launched a search for Teddy Hoover and found his address in Kansas. When they arrived, Teddy answered the door, appearing surprised and nervous. However, this reaction didn't necessarily imply guilt, as many people become nervous when confronted by the police. When questioned about his whereabouts on June 18, 2002, Teddy claimed he couldn't remember, which was understandable given the year time lapse. Teddy denied any involvement in maintaining the pool where Alexandra worked. Nevertheless, the detectives asked him to provide a voluntary DNA sample to rule him out as a suspect. Teddy declined, stating he needed to consult with a lawyer first. He promised to contact the police after speaking with his attorney. The next day, Teddy's lawyer reached out to the investigators, expressing his client's concerns about his DNA sample being added to a database. Teddy reportedly believed in various conspiracy theories and feared that if he cooperated with the police, they would use the information against him in other cases. In an effort to alleviate his concerns, the investigators promised not to enter his DNA into any database and only use it to compare with the DNA found on Ali Kemp. The lawyer agreed to speak with his client and said he would call back. As they waited for the call, the police reviewed the case materials again and stumbled upon a piece of paper in one of the folders with a name that caught their attention. On the day of Alexandra's death, detectives began questioning onlookers who had gathered by the pool, trying to determine if anyone had seen anything suspicious. Interestingly, one of the people they spoke with was Teddy Hoover, who had claimed he had never been to the crime scene before. As the investigation continued, detectives grew increasingly confident that Teddy Hoover might be the man they had been searching for over the past 2 years. After several days, investigators contacted Teddy's lawyer to ask if his client was willing to provide a DNA sample. However, the lawyer responded by stating that his client had refused his services and broken off contact. Police immediately went to Teddy's house, but he had already escaped. As a result, the 29-year-old suspect was placed on the National Wanted list. Despite the efforts of the detectives, Teddy managed to evade capture for months. Billboards featuring his image were still up, but the search had yielded nothing. It wasn't until September 2, 2004, when an anonymous caller contacted the police, that a new lead emerged. According to the caller, he knew the name of Teddy's girlfriend, with whom Teddy was living in Kansas. Detectives sought to locate Laura Barr, a woman connected to Teddy Hoover, but discovered she had left the state at the same time he escaped. This led them to investigate further. The U.S. Postal Service informed the Kansas State Police that Laura was receiving mail in Litchfield, Connecticut, along with a man named Benjamin Appleby, at the same address. The house where they resided was secluded and located in a rural area. Authorities suspected that Benjamin Appleby might be an alias for Teddy Hoover. To aid in the investigation, detectives from Leawood contacted the Connecticut State Police, requesting their assistance in locating Benjamin. It was discovered that he had a prior record in Connecticut, with an outstanding arrest warrant stemming from a 1997 incident where he had exposed himself to a schoolgirl. However, Benjamin had evaded capture and fled the state. With the existing warrant, detectives proceeded to the address associated with Benjamin's mail. Upon arrival, they found him at home and immediately took him into custody. As suspected, Benjamin Appleby was confirmed to be Teddy Hoover. It was revealed that while detectives in Kansas had been seeking a DNA sample from Teddy in connection with Alexandra Kemp's death, he had returned to Connecticut and resumed using his real name, attempting to maintain a low profile and escape notice. To apprehend Benjamin, detectives from Lee would travel to Connecticut, anticipating that he would once again claim innocence. Before bringing him in for questioning, they devised a plan to unsettle him. They filled the interrogation room with crime scene photos and pictures of Alexandra, and placed folders with his name on the table, creating the illusion that the investigation had substantial evidence against him. When Benjamin entered the interrogation room, he was visibly shaken and unable to speak. A detective confronted him, inquiring about the implications of obtaining his DNA sample. Shortly after, Benjamin broke down in tears, confessing to Alexandra's death. He then recounted the events of the fateful June day, explaining that he had noticed Alexandra, found her attractive, and attempted to flirt with her. When she entered the pump room, he followed her, locked the door, and trapped her inside. When Benjamin touched she fought back, leaving him feeling humiliated. In a fit of anger, he attacked her, beating and strangling her until she lost consciousness. Benjamin then attempted to take advantage of her body, undressing her partially. He retrieved a tube of antiseptic gel from a first aid kit, intending to use it as a lubricant. However, just as he was about to proceed, the sound of a car horn distracted him. The victim's friend, who was waiting in a car behind a fence, had noticed something was amiss and sounded the horn. Fearing he would be caught, Benjamin hastily covered the body and fled the scene. Later, Benjamin returned to the area, where he encountered Alexandra's friend, whom he greeted with a smile and a wave, trying to appear nonchalant. He then got into his pickup truck and drove away. Hours later, Benjamin returned to the crime scene again, this time blending in with the crowd of onlookers gathered near the pool. The DNA evidence ultimately led to Benjamin's downfall. Tests revealed that the DNA found on the tube of antiseptic gel and on Alexandra's body matched Benjamin's. Thanks in large part to the efforts of investigator Roger Kemp, the police were finally able to identify the man responsible for Alexandra's murder more than 2 years after the crime was committed. Benjamin Appleby claimed he initially wanted to plead guilty to avoid putting Alexandra's family through further emotional distress. However, at his first court hearing, he suddenly declared his innocence, stating that his confession was made under duress. Despite this, DNA analysis revealed that his DNA was the only sample found on the victim's body, making it difficult to dispute his involvement. Benjamin's lawyers attempted to argue that their client did not intentionally take Alexandra's life, admitting that he was responsible for her death but claiming it was not premeditated. However, forensic experts pointed out that Benjamin had strangled Alexandra for approximately 10 minutes, during which time he could have stopped but chose not to. The prosecution argued that Benjamin's sole intention was to observe Alexandra. On the day of the incident, June 18, 2002, the pool area was empty due to cloudy weather, allowing Benjamin to take advantage of the situation. He was found guilty by a jury in December 2005 and sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 50 years, as well as an additional 19 years for attempting to force Alexandra into intimacy. In February 2019, Benjamin appealed the decision, but the court upheld the life imprisonment sentence for first-degree murder. The Court of Appeal also ruled that the attempt to force Alexandra into intimacy was already taken into account during the initial sentencing. Benjamin was sentenced twice for the same crime, prompting the court to overturn the second conviction. However, even if Benjamin is released on parole, he will be 81 years old by that time. The authorities involved in the case credit Roger Kemp's persistence for helping them catch the culprit. While Benjamin was in prison, Roger and his wife established a self-defense program for girls, teaching thousands of girls and women across the country basic self-defense techniques. Roger Kemp's tireless efforts to bring attention to the case and his work in creating a safe community did not go unnoticed. He was awarded the Presidential Citizens Medal by Barack Obama at the White House. Until his passing at 77 on March 1, 2022, Roger continued to work for the foundation he established in his daughter's name. His ultimate goal was to make a difference in at least one person's life. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.